Not many people knew why Clive Davis wanted Barry White gone so desperately, but a few insiders were aware that it had to do with a shocking revelation Barry had uncovered during his years in the music industry. Beyond his deep, soulful voice and romantic songs that became the soundtrack for countless love stories, Barry White had another defining trait: fearlessness. And that was exactly what Clive Davis despised the most. He saw Barry not just as a talent, but as a threat. But what was this dark secret that made Barry White a target and a threat to Clive Davis? Let's talk about it.
Greed is a funny thing. Once you take a bite of it, it tends to turn on you and start eating you up. The industry was making enough money. The industry was growing fast enough. The industry was progressing enough.
Unlike other celebrities, Barry White never planned to stumble into the music industry. But once he did, Barry knew that no amount of fame was enough for him to sell his soul and his virgin whole to the likes of Clive Davis, who was a powerful business mogul at the time. Barry never failed to speak about how greed was the greatest problem that led many artists down that dark road. On many occasions, he tried to warn other artists like himself, but many wouldn't pay him any attention. Aside from being rumored to be secretly into men, Clive Davis was said to lust after all the male artists who signed under him. But it gets worse. Just like Diddy, many people wondered why so many artists signed to Clive Davis passed under mysterious circumstances. In a bid to avoid the same fate, Barry White made one of the boldest moves that not many black artists dared to take during that period. He established his own music label and took the industry by storm. Barry wasn't just writing his songs, singing, producing, and even acting movies. He was the real hustler among his peers, and he got the reward for it all. But then, after 2 Grammy Awards, things took an unexpected turn, one that would leave Barry silenced forever, just as Clive Davis had wanted. Born in Texas on September 12, 1944, Barry White was the son of Sadie Marie Carter and Melvin White. However, his parents were never married because Melvin already had a wife, something Barry's mother didn't discover until later. After learning his father's name, Barry wasted no time scraping off his mother's surname, Carter, from his birth certificate and replacing it with White, his father's last name. But it gets even more interesting. Barry grew up in South Central Los Angeles, California, where street life was all he knew. He was the eldest of 2 children, with his younger brother Daryl always by his side. The two were involved in all sorts of mischievous activities and were arrested multiple times. In fact, Daryl was famously known for landing in juvie at just 8 years old, an intense reality. But that didn't stop the brothers from engaging in even more notorious acts. Unlike Barry, Daryl would later pay dearly for his involvement in street life. He was unalived in a gang-related dispute. However, some sources claim that Daryl was actually shot over a dispute about $20 in change from a neighbor. This tragedy deeply affected Barry in ways no one could ever imagine. And speaking about Daryl, Barry said, "No one could understand the bond between me and my brother. I struggled to understand the forces that drove his soul in one direction and mine to another." Barry would later write about it in his autobiography, Love Unlimited: Insights on Life and Love. In the book, Barry admitted that music saved him from a similar fate, and here's how that happened. Barry didn't immediately quit the street life after his brother passed. In fact, word had it that he was still getting into trouble. In 1960, at just 16 years old, Barry was arrested for stealing Cadillac tires, which led to him being jailed for 4 months. But something happened during his time in jail that would forever change the trajectory of Barry's life. He heard Elvis Presley's "It's Now or Never" playing on the radio, and at that moment, something shifted in his soul, and he made up his mind to quit the streets because it wasn't the way to live.
Don't gloss over it. You got into a lot of trouble at one point, or your friends did. You hung around with a bad crowd.
That's true. That's very true.
What straightened you out?
The bad crowd. I guess when I turned 17, I looked around me, and everywhere I looked, it was depression. People who were just going around in circles. I just felt that it was a better way of life. I had to make a change or go down.
Another realization came 2 years later on his 18th birthday. Coincidentally, that day also marked the start of his final year in high school. However, instead of attending class, Barry made a life-altering decision. He skipped school and walked to Capitol Records headquarters in Hollywood. There, he stood across the street from the office staring at the building for hours, as if envisioning his future. It was believed that Barry never learned to read or write music, yet his determination and hard work would be all he needed to carve a path he never imagined walking. But here's the thing, even though Barry didn't know much about music at the time, he grew up listening to his mother's classical music collection. Inspired by those songs, he would sit at the piano she bought for him and practice what he heard. It was later rumored that Barry White was the pianist featured in the song Good Night My Love by Jesse Belvin. One reason this rumor spread was that both Jesse Belvin and Barry lived in the same neighborhood. As for Barry, the first time he noticed a change in his voice was when he was 13 years old. Here's what he had to say about it. As a child, I had a normal squeaky voice. Then, as a teenager, that completely changed. My mother cried because she knew her baby boy was now a man. Barry's voice continued to deepen, and by the time he was 14, he noticed that whenever he spoke to his mother, both of them would get scared by how different he sounded.
Voice actually changed.
I woke up one morning when I was 14, and
You woke up?
I spoke to my mother, and I scared both of us.
Barry officially left gang life after serving time in jail for stealing. In fact, at some point, Barry almost charged with murder, but he was later vindicated. According to him, 1960 marked the beginning of his musical career, and he started off by singing in groups. He worked for some small independent labels in Los Angeles, but before this time, he had already released Too Far to Turn Around. Barry also took a risk and recorded many hit singles under his name in the early 1960s while being backed up by vocal groups like the Atlantics and the Majestics. Barry had said that his influences in music were majorly artists like James Cleveland, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, and Marvin Gaye. And just like Marvin Gaye, Barry White never had a thriving relationship with his father. In 1965, Barry produced Feel Alright by the Ben Cantos, which was released on Downey Records. In 1966, he also went on to produce Man Ain't Nothing and I Don't Need It. Barry White wasn't just singing songs like Clive Davis. He was discovering artists, and by 1967, Barry White discovered Felice Taylor and arranged her song, I Feel Love Coming On. And the song blew up so quickly and became a big hit in the UK. In 1969, Barry White was signed by Forward Records of Los Angeles, a division of Transcontinental Entertainment Corporation, as a producer, and just 3 years down the line, Barry formed his own girl group, which he personally discovered and called Love Unlimited. This was a big break for Barry, and it was similar to the Motown girl group called The Supremes, founded by Berry Gordy, who was also making a remarkable impact on the music industry. Under Berry Gordy, Motown Records became a powerhouse that produced the likes of Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, and The Supremes. Through Motown Records, African American music found its way to the mainstream and helped in breaking racial barriers. But that's not all. Barry was equally making great waves in the industry. And in 1973, Barry created the Love Unlimited Orchestra. This orchestra was a 40-piece band that was originally meant to back the girl group. However, it seems White had other plans, because in that same year, he released a song titled Love's Theme, which was written by him and played by the orchestra. At the end of the day, the song became #1 on the Billboard pop charts, but Barry didn't stop there. In the mid-70s, Barry wanted to work with another act and decided he wanted it to be a solo male artist. It was while he was working on a few demos for a male singer that Nunes heard them and insisted that Barry record and release the songs himself as a solo artist. After arguing for days with Nunes, Barry later gave in and appeared for the first time behind the microphone. Barry wrote other songs along with the ones he had recorded, and it became an entire album. His song, I'm Gonna Love You Just a Little More Baby, made it to #1 on the Billboard R&B charts, as well as #3 on the Billboard pop charts, and stayed in the top 40 for many weeks. It was reported that after 6 years, Barry White left 20th Century in 1979 to launch his own record label, Unlimited Unlimited Gold with CBS Columbia Records. Everything seemed to be going well for Barry White. His career was on the right path, even when other record labels were facing a hard time. When Barry was asked how he managed to stay afloat, this was what he said.
With record companies, when I say people, I'm talking about executives, and so many companies are folding because of taping. How do you survive, a black man with a black company?
I am not excluded from that nightmare of piracy and bootlegging. I look at it like this, Jay. When man becomes disenchanted with just making a living, when he turns to greed, it kills him every time.
Over his music career, Barry maintained a very loyal fan base who were always ready to show their support and love for his music. Now, when the disco era came to an end, his success on the pop charts also dwindled. Despite several albums that Barry would release over the next 3 years, he couldn't achieve the same kind of success he was making in the past. To make it worse, his label venture was also taking a financial toll on him, so Barry only had one choice: to concentrate on touring, after which he folded the label. In 1991, things began to take a positive shape for Barry White, and he returned to the top of the charts with his album, Put Me in Your Mix. After a few more songs, White came back with a bang, and each album was more successful than the one before. Still not backing down, Barry also released The Icon Is Love in 1994, which went to #1 on the Billboard R&B album charts. His single, Practice What You Preach, gave him his first #1 on the Billboard R&B singles charts in almost 20 years. The album was later nominated for the Grammy Awards in the Best R&B Album category. Barry even went on to release a duet with Tina Turner titled In Your Wildest Dreams. Barry White's final album, however, came in 1999, and it resulted in his hit song titled Staying Power. The single won him 2 Grammy Awards in the categories of Best Male R&B Vocal Performance and Best Traditional R&B Vocal Performance. And here's the kicker: singing wasn't the only thing that Barry White invested his time in. He was also an actor and played the role of a bus driver for a Prodigy commercial in 1995. He was also a voiceover actor in shows like The Simpsons and Coonskin. Now, Barry White tried to warn other artists who were coming after him about some of the prizes that had to be paid for artistic success in the industry. One of the people he tried to warn was Luther Vandross, who was signed to Clive Davis in 1981 after his many years in the industry. Barry White foresaw the path that Clive Davis was capable of taking Luther, and for the most part, a lot of people already knew that Clive Davis had a secret desire for men, and according to Clive Davis, music was in Luther's DNA, and he was trying to make him a huge star. In the same year that Luther got signed to Clive Davis, he released his debut solo album, Never Too Much. This was the song that cemented Luther's place as a leading figure in the industry, but of course, it came at a great cost. However, Luther continued to release other albums during the 1980s and 1990s. And just like Barry White had warned, very soon little whispers about Luther Vandross being gay started going around. But on many occasions, Luther denied the rumors. However, his friends would later come out to confirm the rumors after his demise. As time went on, Luther's failing health added to the pressure he was already under. Luther's health problems began affecting his ability to record songs and perform them. But it gets worse. Luther's health issues included severe diabetes complications, and eventually he suffered a stroke in 2003. Fans started noticing the sharp contrast in Luther's physique, and very soon all of this began to take a toll on his mental health too. Another thing that Luther had to struggle with was his fluctuating weight, and this made Luther overly self-conscious, which affected his self-esteem. However, people like Whitney Houston tried to encourage him, reminding him that what mattered to his fans was his musical talent. But Luther remained unswayed, and at the age of 54, he passed away due to his health challenges. Barry White would also eventually pass in 2004 at the age of 58 due to issues was associated with his heart and weight. However, Clive Davis, who's almost 100 years old, is still alive, and I don't know about you, but the suspicious whispers about Clive continue till this day. But what are your thoughts about Barry and Luther's early demise in the early 2000s? Do you think Clive Davis was in any way involved with both deaths? Share your thoughts in the comments section and hit the notification button so you don't miss out on celebrity stories like this.